Hi, everybody, and welcome to Primary Application Prep. I'm Dr. Amanda Dye, and excited to talk to you all a little bit today about how to navigate the next stages of the application process. I am going to share my screen and do, 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 do. Here we go. Um, I'm going to hop into this presentation. As you all know, you're welcome to ask questions and things like that. Please note that it will be super helpful to me if you hold questions for the end. I'm going to try to get through a bunch of content in a pretty short period of time. So, with that said, let me let me jump on in. Okay. So, today I want to talk to you all a little bit about the summer application process and what to expect in the coming months, basically. We're going to talk first a little bit about how to request your committee letter or letter packet, depending on what you are, how you're applying. We'll talk about the timeline for and components of the primary application. I'm going to really focus on mostly that, but I also will touch on a few important other aspects of the application process. And hopefully along the way highlight some resources that can help you. So, it's a long agenda. It's a lot to go. This one is a sprint to the finish. So let's jump right in. Committee application. Um, a new aspect of the committee application, a new kind of form is going to open in May. It's part 3 of the committee application, and that is what you will submit in order to request your committee letter to be sent to centralized application services. You're going to have the opportunity when you request your committee letter to provide updates to us about your application. We'll also ask you for information about your centralized application, including your submission date and any application IDs. And the kind of most important single piece of information for folks to take away from this presentation is that the order of operations is submit your primary application first and then request your committee letter. In more detail, you're going to be able to access a screen that looks like this. So when you log back into your committee application, you'll see a few new items. If there's a schedule interview item, don't worry about it. You can ignore that. You will be able to click on submit part 3, and you'll be able to check on the receipt of all of your individual letters from this page as well. So, when you go to submit this form, you'll have the option to include some updates. These include updates to your GPA. So, if you've been taking classes this spring semester since you submitted your initial application, you can update your grades and upload new transcripts. You don't have to do this if you are somebody who's already finished your coursework and are not in classes currently. You can also upload a resume or a CV, especially if there are any updates to the one that you submitted with your initial committee application, and your final personal statement, as well as updates. This is a little bit of what it looks like when you are filling out the form. You can see that it'll look a lot like the previous form that you filled out when you were creating your committee application. And this is just a screenshot of what it'll look like when you are able to give updates. So you can see you're able to upload files as well as include text updates. So, in order to do this part of the process, as I said before, you have to submit your primary application to a centralized application service. So, if you're applying to MD programs, you'll be submitting your AMCAS application and then notifying us of your submission. We'll also ask you to confirm that all of your letters of recommendation have been received. This is something that you can track through your application. And we'll ask you to make sure that you have shared all of your finalized application materials. This is what the application services entry page looks like. So you can include more than one, right? So there's this a little little button for add application. So if you are applying, let's say, to both AMCAS and AACOMAS, or AMCAS and TMD SAS, you can include both of them. You'll be able to include your application ID number. If your application service requires a letter ID number, you can give it, and then you can include the date on which you submitted your primary application. This is all information that we need in order to process all of the requests. And if you if you need to submit multiple versions of this form, that's a possibility. Let's see here. After you have submitted, or sort of simultaneously with submitting this part of the process, you should save a copy of your submitted primary application as a PDF and email it to us at prehealthdocs@barnard.edu. This is a really important part of the process, helps trigger us to ensure that all of your materials are available. There are some extra instructions here. If you're applying to AMCAS, you'll be able to use the print application function. The most important thing for AMCAS applicants to remember is that it can take a couple of seconds after you hit submit on your application for your submission date and time to appear in your application. You do want to double check that the submission date and time are appearing at the top of each page when you send it to us. If you're applying to ADSAS or AACOMAS, those systems are set up a little bit differently, and they'll allow you to generate one PDF per school that you apply to. You can choose any representative school, it doesn't matter which one. Any version of your ADSAS or AACOMAS application is helpful. And these files are really helpful for us, number one, in ensuring that we have all of the final versions of your personal statement, your activity descriptions, and everything else that you have shared with professional programs, as well as just helping us for advising throughout the application cycle. Once you complete all of these steps to request your committee letter, you should expect that your letter will be uploaded to your application service within about 4 to 6 weeks. You're not going to be able to submit additional updates to the committee application portal after your initial submission, but you can always email us at the Pre-Health Docs email address if you need to add anything or adjust anything about your letter requests. And if any aspect of your application changes after you have requested your committee letter, anything changes about, your goals or your desire to move forward with the application, you should notify us right away. You can write to prehealthadvising@barnard.edu or to me individually. So some important dates for everyone to keep in mind. You're going to be able to begin requesting your committee letter in the month of May, because May is the first month in which applications can be submitted. And again, you need to submit at least one primary application before you can request your committee letter. The last day to request your committee letter is going to be August 1st, 2026. That means you must have submitted your primary application by August 1st and requested your committee letter on that date. No exceptions to this. We will not do late committee requests, and it is very important that you plan to submit relatively early in the cycle. So submitting later than August 1st is not advisable in any case. Our goal is to have all letters uploaded and completed by the beginning of September, and so that is when the cycle ends for us. Okay, next steps, we're going to talk a little bit about letters of recommendation. I know many of you have requested letters from individual writers, and we'll talk about how those requests are going to continue to be processed over the coming weeks. So just as a reminder, you can log into your committee application and navigate to the letter writer section to see all of the entries that you've made, and to track receipt of those letters. You can add additional letter writers really at any point. However, please do keep in mind that letter writers are always going to receive this kind of standard message, which quotes the May 15th deadline. So if you are adding a letter writer near or even after that deadline, it is really important that you communicate with the writer about what they're going to receive, right? That they should expect to see an email that quotes this deadline, and that that is something that they should expect. You should know that we receive letters and we mark them as received. A human being does this so that we can just double check that, your name is spelled right, that the letter has a signature, that it's on letterhead and things like that. So letters are not marked received automatically as soon as they are sent in, and they are marked as received during business days or hours. So if a writer tells you that they have submitted a letter over the weekend, in all likelihood, on the following Monday, we'll be able to mark it as received. And just as a reminder, we will include a copy of every single recommendation that we have on file for you with your committee letter. So that means letter writers do not also have to send their letters to your application service. We're going to bundle everything together and send it to your application services on behalf of you and your individual writers. Again, the deadline that we have set for letters of recommendation is May 15th. And that's the deadline that's in the letter or the email that writers will get. However, what happens if a letter isn't received by May 15th? You do not need to panic. You should remind your letter writer, and you should ensure that they can submit your letter by the time you plan to submit your primary application, basically. So you cannot request your committee letter until we have all of those individual letters on file. And that means if your goal is to request your committee letter on June 1st, then we need all of those letters to come to us before June 1st. We will continue to receive letters and mark them as received after that May 15th deadline. We will give, grace to those letter writers, but it's really important that the letters come in early enough that we are able to include them in the committee process. Okay. Next bit, we're going to talk about primary applications and what to expect from your application services. This is, I think, the longest section, so deep breath. Okay, important dates for everyone to keep in mind. You may have already seen some combination of these dates, but for those of you who are applying to MD programs through AMCAS, you're going to be able to log into the 2027 application system on May 5th, so just a couple of weeks from now, and you'll be able to begin entering data, requesting transcripts, all sorts of things like that. But the first day that you can actually submit your application is May 28th. That grace period really just allows people some time with the system to be able to put all of their information in. It can take a little while to actually submit the application. So keep in mind that the very first day you're going to be able to hit submit on this application is May 28th. I'll talk a little bit about what the verification process looks like, but you should know that AMCAS will not start transmitting information to schools until the end of June. So they're going to start verifying applications beginning on May 28th, but they're going to verify a whole big group of them and release the big group of them to schools all at once at the end of June. AACOMAS, which is the application system for DO programs, will open on May 4th. And there's a different system at AACOMAS. Basically, you can start the application and submit it the same day. And data is transmitted to schools as applications are verified. So there's no holding period. For ADSAS, dental programs, May 12th is the first day that you can actually start entering data in the application system, and June 1st is the first day that you can submit the application. And as applications are verified, they're going to be shared with individual dental schools. This is kind of how the application workflow is going to work for each of these application services. The first step is for you, the applicant, to make sure that you have sent all of your required transcripts, so any transcript from any U.S. institution, that you have filled out all of the application online and paid your submission fee or used a valid fee assistance program benefit. Once that happens, your application moves into a processing stage. The application service is going to receive those individual transcripts from every institution you've attended, and a human being at the application service is going to verify that the coursework in your application matches the coursework on your transcripts. They're going to calculate your GPAs per the standards of the application service, and they're going to verify that your application is processed and ready to view by schools. After the application service processes or verifies your application, they're going to distribute it to every school that you've listed in your application service. They will also deliver additional documents like your committee letter and the attached letters of recommendation to the schools you've listed in your application. So the first step is you submit, the application service processes, and then the application service shares that verified information with the programs you've applied to. The sections of the applications are going to be pretty similar, so I'm just going to run through them pretty quickly, but these are things that everyone is probably pretty familiar with by now. All of these application services are going to ask you for a little bit of background information, potentially a little bit about like where in the country you grew up and some characteristics of your family. They will ask you to list every college course that you've taken, as well as, grades and things like that. They'll give you an opportunity to write about your experiences in AMCAS. That section is called Work and Activities. They will allow you to provide information about your letters of evaluation. If you're applying with a committee letter and you don't expect to receive any letters outside of the ones that we're collecting for you, you may only have one entry in that section just for your committee letter. We'll come back to how to fill out that section for the committee letter in a second. You'll list the schools you want to apply to, and you will submit essays. Everyone has to write a personal statement. If you are applying to MD, PhD programs, you are able to add responses to 2 additional essays. And then finally, the last section of the application is documenting your standardized tests. If you're applying to AMCAS, you don't have to do anything extra in order for your MCAT score, for example, to show up in your application because you registered for the MCAT with the same ID number and it's owned by the same people who own and operate AMCAS. They'll ask you to just document your tests, but the actual official score report and things like that will appear in your application very seamlessly. For AMCAS applicants, the current submission fee is $180, and that includes 1 medical school. You have to pay an additional $48 per additional school to which you apply. A COMES application, as you can see, really, really similar, very similar kind of information that you're going to be asked to provide. It's arranged a little bit differently and the interface is going to look different, but the actual information that you are providing to these programs is going to be pretty much the same. So you will be able to include all of the same information about yourself, your courses, your experiences, as well as your personal statement and the programs you want to apply to. Fees are a little bit different for a COMES. It's $198 for 1 school and the overall application, and $60 per additional school. Excuse me. For ADSAS, again, really similar information, although do note that the personal statement length is a little bit shorter for dental applicants. And there are supplemental questions that many dental schools ask. So instead of having a primary and a separate secondary application, a lot of dental schools will include supplemental questions in ADSAS and then not have you submit a supplemental application later. There's some information at the link there that you can follow. And here again, same structure for the fees. The initial submission is $264, and then every additional school is $115. So yes, it's a little bit more expensive with the DIA ADSAS, although typically applicants are applying to a smaller number of schools. As I said before, when you are requesting your or when you're filling out your application, you're going to be asked to document your letter. This is the information that you'll need to document your letter. I'm going to send this to you via email and probably more than one way. So you don't have to memorize this or screenshot it. But this is the info that you'll need. So I'm the author of all of committee letters. The email address that we use, this is probably the most important piece of information, is prehealthdocs@barnard.edu. That way all of our letters are associated with the same email address. So when you are documenting your letter in these various application systems, you will use the PreHealth Docs address and not my individual address to request your letter. Transcripts are also a really important part of this process, obviously, because as we know, grades are important. You as an applicant are responsible for making sure that your transcripts get to your application services. And so you need to make a request to the registrar's office at every school you've attended, basically. If you are currently in classes in the spring 2026 semester, I recommend making this request after your final grades are posted. If you have concluded your coursework already and are not in classes this semester, you can request your transcript anytime after you start your application. There's a link here to Barnard's registrar's page on requesting a transcript. Our system is pretty easy to use now. If you haven't done it before, it's all online, so there are no paper transcripts anymore, which is what application services by far prefer. And so you can do the online request. You'll have the option to select these specific application services. So if you're applying to AMCAS, you can tell the system that you want it to go to AMCAS directly. If you need a transcript request form, if your application service provides one of those, you can either attach it to your request or if that's not possible, email it to the registrar. And again, if you have coursework from other institutions, let's say you transferred to Barnard or you took some courses over the summer or you took college level courses while you were still in high school as part of a dual enrollment program, you do need to list all those institutions and you do need to make sure that you contact each of the registrar's offices to have official transcripts sent to each of your application services. When you list your courses, every application service is going to ask you to classify your courses. So they're going to tell you to give them the information about like course code and name and number of credits and things like that. And they'll also ask you to choose what group of courses this class belongs to. Every centralized application service has its own set of policies around course classification. So it is important that you pay attention to the rules for your specific application service. And if you're applying to two application services, the classification systems might not be exactly the same. So it's really important to use the guides that are provided by your application services. For example, in AMCAS, courses are classified according to their primary content, right? So it's not necessarily based on department of origin. So for example, a course that is in, let's say, a a psychology department, but is a statistics course by content and title and things like that, needs to be classified as a math course because the content is math, even though it's not offered in a math department. If it's an interdisciplinary course, you go based on the preponderance of the content. So if it's a neuroscience course that has some elements that are biological and some that are more kind of psychology oriented, but the preponderance of the content is biology, then you classify it as biology. For other application systems like AACOMAS and ADSAS, courses are classified by title primarily, and failing that, you use the department that is offering the course. So you're not concerned about necessarily the specific content of the course as much as you are where the course is offered. And application services can change the classifications that you enter. So if you have a course that's an English departmental course and you classify it as biology, they may change that in the course of verifying your application. Including experiences in your application is important. Many of you have seen my workshop on writing about those experiences where I cover some of this content, but you also are responsible for categorizing your experiences in each of these application services. Every single service has a different set of category labels that you can use. You should choose the best fit, even though many activities might fit under multiple category headers. You can only choose one. So try to choose the best fit and then use the text that you have to describe the experience to clarify as needed. Many of these application services will ask you for a contact person with their email address or phone number as a way of potentially being able to verify your participation in those activities. You should do your best with this. You can use yourself as the contact person if there's not another person who can verify your participation. So this happens sometimes with entries for hobbies, for example, or sometimes for entries that are about involvement in student-run organizations. There might not be kind of a third-party, adult who can verify your participation because everyone, kind of was a student who was participating. That's okay. You can use yourself as the contact person for things like that. If you're including college awards, you can use, maybe your a contact from your department or a contact from the dean's office. If you are using an application system that allows multiple date ranges, please do use those date ranges to your best advantage if you possibly can. And as always, using the instruction manuals to understand formatting and that sort of stuff is very important. Essays, I know lots of folks are working on now. It's a good idea to make sure that your essays are ready in advance of your planned submission date. Remember that conferences with Writing Fellows are open. Our colleagues in the Writing Fellows are going to open more dates in May, and I will be sending everybody an email once those are available for sign up. My just little kind of formatting tip here is that you should print your application before you submit it just to check for any weirdnesses that happen when you copy it from your text editor to the application. All of these application systems render plain text, so things like italics or bolding or sometimes various kinds of paragraph formatting do not translate well. So it's really important to check on how the essay is going to appear to the reader. Test scores, as you all know, some kind of test score is always going to be required. Many of you have taken the MCAT or the DAT, and application services will generally allow you to submit your application with or without a test score. So if you're a person who maybe is testing in May, and you'll receive your application in June, you could theoretically submit your application before you see your MCAT score. You only need to select one school in order to have your application submitted and go through the process of verification. So if you are testing a little bit later and you want to submit your application to one school to kind of get that processing ball rolling while you are waiting for your official scores, that's something that you can do. If you were to do that, you could add additional schools once you see your score, and there's no additional processing time if that happens. Once your application is verified, it's verified. It does not have to be verified again. If you are submitting your application before a test date, or even before your scores are released, it's very important to document your planned test dates in the application. This is important if it's your first score or if you are retesting, because you definitely want to make sure that if an admissions committee views your application before your scores are released, they know that additional scores are coming. All of these application services will also ask you to disclose any institutional actions that are on your record. These can be institutional actions for academic performance or for conduct violations. If there are any actions on your record, it is important generally that you do disclose them, and you'll have a space of 1,325 characters to do so. You can contact Ange Conception in the dean's office. Her email address is here if you're unsure of whether there are any institutional actions on your record. And if you become the subject of an institutional action after you've submitted the primary application, you will be responsible for informing schools to which you have applied individually. Similarly, for legal actions, primary applications generally do require disclosure if you have been convicted of or pleaded guilty or no contest to any felony or misdemeanor. Major exceptions to this requirement are juvenile convictions that have been expunged. And there are some state-based exceptions based on like individual state laws around legal reporting. So if there is anything like this in your past, it is important to check out the instruction manuals to be sure of what exactly you do need to report. You should know that many medical and dental other health profession schools do conduct background checks. So this is something that could come up if it is not disclosed and could create problems later in the application cycle. You will also be asked as part of your primary application to designate your state of legal residence. You can only pick one state as your state of legal residence in an application service. And this designation is not necessarily policed by anyone, right? Nobody's going to check anything in the verification process that says, you are a New York resident or something like that. However, if you are applying to public professional schools, you need to check their individual websites for information about how you can establish and demonstrate state residency in any given state, because the rules do differ from state to state. In New York, it's more or less just a year of continuous residency in a place that, is your own, essentially like an apartment that you're renting or something like that. In other states, it's a longer period of time, or sometimes they require a history of filing taxes or things like that. So it does vary. It's important that you investigate the rules per state. And you should know that even though that primary application designation of state residency is not going to be verified in any particular way, if you're applying to public schools, they will probably ask you for additional documentation of your state residency, either when you submit your secondary or when you've been invited for an interview, and definitely before they assess your tuition. So, long story short, be aware of the requirements at any state that you are claiming residency in and have the documentation needed to prove that when you get into the application process with these programs. Application services are also going to allow you to indicate both permanent and preferred contact information. So things like street address, you might, if your permanent address is with your family in Ohio, like mine was when I was in college, you might include your family's address as your permanent address, but say, your apartment in New York City as your preferred contact, right? The place where you're currently living. Most important is that the email address you include as your preferred contact email is one that you are going to have continual access to and one that you will check regularly. That is where you are going to get notifications from schools. So making sure that you are including an email address that you are going to be paying attention to is very important. Before you submit your primary application, it's really important that you double check everything. You want to make sure everything is accurate. You definitely want to proofread your application. You'll be asked if you want to release application information to your advisor. I encourage you, if you are comfortable doing so, to please select yes. This allows me to advise you better during the application cycle and supports our broad reporting of admissions data. We never share information about individual applicants. Everything is in the aggregate. And generally speaking, I am the only person who sees the individual data. So it's really, really helpful to me if you release your info so that I can be aware of your progress in the application. Also, as part of certifying your application, you're going to have to acknowledge the AI policy of each of the application services. They are different, so it's a good idea to be aware of those and just kind of know what you're going to need to agree to when you submit your application. These are just a couple of example policies that I talked about in one of my writing sessions as well, but the specific wording does differ from school to school, from service to service, sorry. After you hit submit on your application, the vast majority of the data that you have included cannot be changed. In AMCAS, for example, there are a very small number of fields that you can request changes to, including name and contact information. You can add new letters of evaluation. You can add a new MCAT date. And you can add new medical schools. But in terms of your personal statement, your experiences, the coursework that you've entered, once you hit submit, it is all done. Other application services have slightly different policies. So for example, in AACOMAS and ADSAS, you can add additional activities after you have submitted your application, although you cannot edit ones that you have previously submitted. So be aware of what your application service allows, but keep in mind that the content of your application largely is not going to be subject to change once you submit that first application. And as I've said throughout, use your application services manuals. They're such a good source of information. The applicant guide for AMCAS is now online and searchable and really, really easy to use. You can also contact application services if you have a question that is not answered by those documents. I will be happy to help to the degree that I can. I will let you know upfront. I am relying on these application service guides, and there may be questions that I will need to refer you to the application services for. Okay. All right, I'm going to run through a little bit more information about what to expect after you submit your primary application and just some kind of guidance about how to think about the coming application year. And so, quickly, secondary applications are generally the thing that happens after your primary. Secondaries are school-specific supplemental applications, as you know. Generally speaking, for medical schools, these are sent to all or almost all applicants after your primary application is received. Usually, a school will have some combination of short answer or short essay questions. They will have additional fees associated with submitting the primary application. So, AMCAS fees go directly to AMCAS. When you submit a secondary, those fees are going to go directly to the school that you're applying to. Overall, secondaries are usually an opportunity to express your interest in and your fit to a particular school. They are distinct from primary applications because they're only going to one individual program. You can really tailor all of the information that you present there. And it's a good idea to submit your secondaries relatively quickly, meaning within a couple of weeks of receiving an invitation to the secondary, you should be submitting it. It's super important to keep records of your secondary application responses. Many individual schools' secondary platforms will not allow you to access the information after you've submitted it. So make sure that you are keeping local records of everything that you submit, especially because a lot of schools use prompts that are either similar or on similar themes. So some of your writing may be repurposable across these secondaries. Although it's very important if you are using a secondary that you've created for one school to make sure that you're double checking for any mentions of that school name and ensuring that you're updating those. Internet forums generally will have the previous year's questions. So if you want to get started with pre-writing secondaries, especially after you've submitted your primary application and are kind of in the waiting mode, that's definitely something that you can do. There is always the possibility that schools may change their secondaries from year to year, but I would say that overall, they don't tend to change them drastically from year to year. Okay, next bit, assessments. Many of you may have heard that in addition to things like the MCAT or the DAT, these subject area tests, some professional schools use situational judgment tests as part of their application review. A situational judgment test is different from MCAT or DAT because it's a test of how you might respond in a given scenario. Really, the focus in these kinds of assessments is on your reasoning, your ability to communicate your reasoning, and the consistency of your response with the ethics and kind of best practices within the profession. Usually, these situational judgment tests are used as part of the screening process for interviews. So I often encourage people to schedule these exams for that time period where their primary application is being processed and before they receive secondary applications. And it's important to know that schools may use the scores for these assessments differently in their application processes. There are two very commonly used tools that I want to talk about a little bit today. The first is Casper, which is generally speaking used pretty broadly and is very common for applicants to take. And the second one is AAMC Preview, which is required by a number of schools, but not a huge number. And it is possible that an applicant might create a list that doesn't require the AAMC Preview. Assessments like these do make accommodations available. So if you have applied for testing accommodations for other kinds of assessments, especially if they're like reading or writing and processing kinds of things, you can apply for accommodations, but it's very important to apply early. If you have been approved for accommodations for the MCAT, you still have to apply for AAMC Preview accommodations, but usually that process is pretty streamlined if you've already received an approval for MCAT in the past. So to start with Casper, like I said before, this one is required pretty broadly by a lot of health professions programs, including MD, DO, PA nursing, some dental programs. It's offered by a company called Acuity Insights, and it is used to assess these non-academic skills and qualities. It's about understanding your logical decision-making, ethical reasoning, that sort of stuff. Casper is an assessment that costs $85, including 7 school distributions. And if you need to send it to more than 7 schools, it's $20 per additional school. If you have a fee waiver from AMCAS or ACOMAS, the Casper folks do recognize that. So you don't have to pay additionally if you have a fee waiver. The way that this assessment works is you're presented with 14 scenarios. Some of them are going to be scenarios that you see in like writing, and some of them are going to be scenarios that you see in a video. And you, in turn, are going to respond to those scenarios in some combination of video recorded and written responses. So when you are being asked to write a response, you'll have 5 minutes to answer 3 questions about the scenario. If it's a video response, you get 1 minute to record a response to 2 questions. These tests are scored by trained human raters. Grammar, sort of like specific linguistic choices are not necessarily an important part here. They are really scoring based on the content of your response. Is your response logical? Is it rational? Would it lead to a good outcome in this scenario? There will be a numerical score. You won't receive it, unfortunately. So the numerical score on your assessment is going to be shared directly with the professional programs where you send your scores. You, as an examinee, receive your quartile. So you'll know if you're in the top quartile, the second, third, or fourth. This is a test that is proctored at home. You need a webcam to do it, but you do not have to go to a specific testing center in order to take it. And Casper, you have a limit of 1 test per year, and and scores are only valid for 1 application cycle. So if you've taken Casper in the past, you would still need to take it again for this year. You should check individual schools' requirements regarding whether they require an additional like value alignment thing that's called Duet. Most of them don't. It's really important to get familiar with the test format and the system requirements for actually taking. There are a bunch of practice questions and a full-length practice test that you can take online. I highly recommend doing both of those things as part of your preparation. And because there isn't specific content that you need to learn, I think that probably what's most important about practicing for this assessment is getting familiar with the timing, right? Especially, responding to 3 questions in 5 minutes. It takes a little bit of practice to be able to get up to that speed. And the test is designed to make you feel a little bit of time pressure. So making sure that you're comfortable with that timing is going to be important. The other assessment that I mentioned earlier, AAMC Preview, there is a list here of schools that explicitly require the AAMC Preview. If any of these schools are on your list, then yes, probably you do need to sit for this exam. If none of these schools are on your list, then you may not need to. Preview is recommended at a longer list of schools, but I generally would advise registering for it only if you are applying to a school where it is required. AAMC Preview, because it is owned and operated by the AAMC, our friends who own the MCAT and AMCAS and created that beautiful list of competencies for pre-med students. This is a test that really assesses your ability to reason within those competencies. It is a $105 fee, flat rate for you, and your scores go to every school that either requires or recommends it. If you are applying to a school that doesn't require or recommend it, they won't see your scores. AAMC Preview is ongoing. Tests are offered March through September, and you can register via the website there. It is set up quite differently from the Casper exam. So in AAMC Preview, you will be provided with a scenario in writing, and then you will be provided with a list of possible responses to that scenario. Your job is not to create additional responses, but to rate each of the proposed responses on a 4-point effectiveness scale. So not at all effective to very effective. And the test is scored by comparing your ratings to ratings given by a group of medical educators, physicians, etc. So if the medical educator group says that something is very effective and you say it's very effective, you get full credit. If the medical educators say something is very effective and you say it's effective, you get partial credit for a near match. This assessment is scored for reasons completely out of my understanding on a 1 to 9 scale. Please don't ask. 5 is the median score, and you will receive your score and your percentile rating. It's a format that looks exactly like your MCAT score report about 30 days after you test. Again, this is a test that you can take at home. There are very strict proctoring requirements, like requirements about the characteristics of the room that you need to be in, but you do not need to go to a testing center in order to take this. You can test up to 2 times a year and 4 times in your lifetime as of 2024, and you should check individual school requirements regarding test expiration dates. So, for example, if you took preview last year, check with the individual schools that you're applying to that require it. If they don't require an updated score, then you can use the one you have on file. Again, really important to familiarize yourself with the test format and the system requirements, especially around the proctoring process, because they are very serious about it. There is a very robust examinee preparation guide. They have, I think at this time, 3 full-length practice exams that you can take on the website, and there are other free prep resources that you can use to get used to this format. Okay. Next bits, I'm gonna really try to buzz through. Quickly reviewing school list stuff, right? Hopefully you have seen my presentation all about creating your school list, but keep in mind that for applicants to these various kinds of programs, um, average number of applicants for MD programs has been somewhere in the 22 to 23 range for a number of years. I think somewhere between 15 and 25 is usually the right spot for most applicants. More than that becomes really challenging in the secondary process. So I will say, the primaries make it very easy to add as many schools as you possibly could pay for to your application. But when you start to get those secondaries and have to respond individually to these schools, your ability to do that is going to be hampered by a larger number of programs. Applicants to osteopathic schools, traditionally somewhere between 5 and 10 typically for our Barnard applicants, partly because of, more DO schools are not in urban areas, so usually there are fewer schools that are a great fit for applicants from Barnard. And for dental schools, somewhere around 10 schools seems to be about the national average for applications. Again, because dental schools are a little bit more expensive to apply for, and there's a smaller number of them overall. Really important to do your research in building your list. You will hear me talk about MSAR. I will bang on about it all day long. It is a really, really great investment and free if you have fee assistance. The Choose DO Explorer provides some similar information for DO programs, and the ADEA Official Guide to Dental Schools and Dental School Explorer are really, really helpful in learning more about professional programs. Also, a moderate cost subscription service. Keep all of the factors that are important to you in mind as you are building your list. Please go back to my Choosing Health Profession Schools presentation for a more thorough dive into all of this. But it's very important that your list generally combines schools where you are a very strong match in terms of metrics, as well as a strong match in terms of how your goals and your individual values and priorities align with the resources and mission of the individual institutions. Please make sure you are keeping notes on the programs you plan to apply to. Number one, this is useful for a lot of decision making, but it's super useful for secondary applications. It's not uncommon to get a question like, why are you applying to our program on a secondary? And having your thoughts about why you're adding a school to your list can be really, really helpful. I also, as a certified spreadsheet person, really recommend keeping a spreadsheet to track your application status for each of the programs you apply to. If you have a different kind of brain, maybe this doesn't work for you, but finding some way to keep records of what you're submitting and when is a good idea. And again, metrics, things like your test scores and GPA can sometimes be a limiting factor, but they aren't ever deterministic in this process. No GPA, no matter how good, guarantees a particular outcome in the process. And so it's very important to know why you are applying to each program and to be able to articulate your fit to each of these individual schools. preparing for interviews really, really quickly, just so that everyone is kind of going into this application cycle with a sense of what to expect. Interviews can start to be offered beginning as soon as schools have reviewed your completed application. So usually this is on something like a rolling basis, meaning that the earlier your application is completed, the earlier you may hear back about interviews. And most of the interviews are going to take place between August and March, although individual school timelines can vary. So some schools, for example, might finish all of their interviews within the calendar year. By the end of December 2026, they're going to be done. Other schools might be doing interviews into April 2027. So there's a lot of variation. I will say that for the most part, schools have generally filled out their interview calendars by the end of January. And so that's usually the point at which folks have a decent idea of the number of interviews they will have had in an application cycle. Some schools use a more traditional interview format where it's either a one-on-one or a panel interview. They may have access, the interviewer may have access to your application information or not, but it's a more traditional interview conversation. Some schools use a multiple mini interview format where you are rotating through stations and responding to situational questions rather than maybe questions about yourself and your candidacy. And some schools use a little bit of a mix of both of them. I'm going to talk a lot more about what to expect from these in my interview prep workshop, which I do very, very early in September. And I want everyone to just be aware that you'll have access to resources at Beyond Barnard, including scheduling mock interviews over the course of the application year. So even though all of this will happen after you've requested your committee letter, I'm still around and can still be helpful as you move through the rest of the application cycle. Most schools have continued to offer virtual interviews. There are some exceptions, but especially within MD programs, most of them appear to have been, sort of pretty decisively committed to continuing virtual interviews. However, individual schools could vary, so it's good to have a little bit of money set aside in case you do need to travel anywhere. And it's good to know that many schools will offer in-person opportunities for students to visit after they've been admitted. So if you are doing virtual interviews, and are worried, oh, what's going to happen if I get into a program, but I've never been there. In most cases, you're going to have ample opportunity to visit that program before you make a decision. And then finally, some resources to keep in mind. You all know how to find us at Beyond Barnard. Appointments will continue to be available through the summer. Please keep in mind that you have access to all of the writing workshops that I have that I've given this semester. We'll continue to make Writing Fellows appointments available. I'm able to give comments on advanced drafts, although it can take a little bit longer for those comments during high volume periods like now. But you can send me doc attachments for comments if you like. Then lots of links here to a variety of different resources that I think are really helpful. There is a great session that the AMCAS folks do every year on navigating like transcripts and coursework entry that I think is really, really helpful. So you can either attend that live or check out the recording. And then other things like the instruction manuals are important. Many of the application services have social media accounts that post updates and can be a good follow if you are on social media. And that is the conclusion of my bit. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. I know there are some questions, so I'm going to come back to the chat and take a look at those. Thank you for bearing with me during the fastest hour of talking that I do annually. Okay. So we have a couple of questions here in the chat already. If you want to add more, you are very welcome. So there's a question about you submitted a kind of a draft of the personal statement already. Will you need to submit your finalized personal statement? Yes, but it can be the personal statement that is in your primary application. So we will ask you to send us a copy of that verified application in order to request your committee letter, and that's going to have your final personal statement inside it. Next question is, for those who are applying to AMCAS, It's not clear if if applicants need to request transcripts ahead of the application opening. Um, no. So once the application opens, once you start an application and add a school to your AMCAS application, that's the point at which you can contact a registrar's office and have them request a transcript. So if you get into AMCAS on May 5th, you can request on May 5th, and your application won't be processed until they receive that transcript and any other transcripts as well. This is the same if you are a transfer student or anything else like that. You can you can request your transcripts as soon as you have started your application for 2027. Haley, I saw you raise your hand as well.
Hi. Um, I had a kind of more specific question-ish. Do you recommend just like if letter writers kind of ask for more information, do you think we should tailor specific things to specific letter writers? Like if I'm doing someone from a lab, should I say, "Oh, it would be awesome if you could talk about my devotion to research," or should it just be like general, send over my personal statement?
I always think it's a great idea to come to an individual letter writer with an idea of how you think that that person's relationship with you can be helpful for application reviewers. So as a person who, occasionally writes a letter or recommendation or two myself, if somebody says to me, "Hey, I'm applying for this thing and I am asking you for a letter of recommendation because you have observed X, Y, and Z of my candidacy," it's easy for me to then evaluate and say, "Yes, in fact, that's how I would characterize the relationship that we have. Sure, I can do that, right?" And so, kind of tailoring your comments for letter writers about like what you think in that individual relationship is going to be most interesting for application reviewers is totally reasonable. And I saw Olivia, you have a hand raised also.
Hi, Dr. Dye. Yeah, I had a question about just to clarify with the recommendations, the letters of recommendation. So our people that we're asking, they're going to submit through our Barnard portal, right? Not through the AMCAS, because I know you can. Okay, so just
Exactly.
okay.
Yes. So, because you are applying with a committee letter and you are, Barnard grads and students who have access to our committee process, we collect those letters. So, letter writers only need to send the letter to us, and then we'll package them together with all of the other letters. Sorry, we'll package all of your letters together with your committee letter and upload them as a single individual PDF. So the only circumstance in which a candidate needs an additional letter is maybe there's a person who you have a new relationship with and they feel comfortable writing a letter in August, but it's too late for it to come to the committee portal, then to kind of come through our part of the process. They could then send it individually to AMCOS or any application service. But generally speaking, most of our applicants just have the one entry for the committee letter, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. And was there a way to kind of like resend the email to our recommenders?
The email, the email only gets sent once. The
Okay.
system is only set up to send it one time, but you individually can remind your letter writers.
Okay.
And if nothing else, they can email us at prehealthdocs.barnard.edu,
Okay.
at barnard.edu, sorry, to submit their letter that way.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have a question in the chat about using committee letter for special master's programs. Yes, you can request your committee letter for those programs, but you also need to be applying for to a primary application. So if you are applying to master's programs, but you're not planning to apply to a centralized application service, you should get in touch with me individually, and we'll talk about the ways to move forward. Next question is there a section in the application to indicate an upcoming summer course? Yes, that's a good point. Thank you, Juliet. In all application services, you can include your planned or future coursework. This coursework is not going to be verified as part of your primary application process, because you won't have grades at the time that you are writing about it. But you can absolutely indicate in your coursework section if you have a course upcoming, or if you are a junior this year and you know that you're going to be taking courses over the next year, you can include which courses you plan to take just so that schools have a preview of that. Um, Question about the letter writer deadline. So May 15th is our stated deadline. May 15th is a deadline that we state early because we know that letter writers sometimes are not great with deadlines. So it's a soft deadline, meaning we will continue to accept letters of recommendation after May 15th. However, your individual deadline for letters of recommendation is based on when you want to request your committee letter. You cannot request your committee letter until all of your letters of recommendation have been received. So if it's your goal, like I said, to request your committee letter on June 1st, then we need all of your individual letters to be with us by June 1st. You can add letter writers at any point, but as I said before, if you are adding a new letter writer now, they're going to get an email that states that May 15th deadline, and sometimes they are not pleased that the deadline is so soon, and they contact me angrily. So I would encourage you to have a conversation with your letter writers if you're adding somebody now to say, hey, you are going to receive an email that says the deadline is May 15th, but actually, if you submit by May 29th, that will be great for me. Um, And for application, so for request timing, you can request your committee letter after you have submitted your primary application, not when you start it. When you actually hit submit on that primary application is the first day that you can request your committee letter. Yes, technically the earliest, if you are applying to AMCAS, the first day that you can request your committee letter is May 28th, which is the first day you can submit your primary application. If you are applying to ACOMAS, the first day that you can submit your application is May 4th, and so that is the first day you can request your committee letter. Okay. All right, well, we are a little bit over time, and I don't want to keep everybody on a nice evening like this. I will share this recording and all of my slides with many links, as well as lots of instructions on this process in the coming days. Please do keep in touch as you have questions, and I look forward to working with you folks in the application cycle. You made it. Have a good evening, everybody.